Between 1863 and 1869, three American railroad companies accomplished something truly remarkable. They connected the railroad network on the East Coast with the lines on the West Coast. The Transcontinental Railroad, stretching a total of 1,912 miles and including 19 tunnels cut through granite mountains, was an engineering marvel considering the conditions of the time. After all, even then, the United States already had more miles of railroad track than the rest of the world combined. But here's the surprising part. This massive project was not the only great achievement in American railroad history. In 1886, railroads in the South pulled off another feat, far less known, yet at least as impressive. They changed the track gauge of approximately 11,500 miles of railroad in just a day and a half. Yes, you heard that right, 36 hours. And they did it so smoothly that almost no one noticed. The story of railroads actually goes much further back. It began in the 16th century Europe with simple carts used to move ore out of mines. The earliest tracks were made of wood, later replaced by cast iron and then iron rails. Over time, L-shaped rail systems were tried, but as rail cars grew heavier, these systems proved unreliable and prone to failure. This led to the widespread adoption of the flat rail and flanged wheel system we recognize today. Around the same time, James Watt's improvements to the steam engine paved the way for steam locomotives. However, this progress brought a new problem: track gauge, the distance between the rails. This measurement was critical because a train built for one gauge simply could not run on tracks of another. Wider gauges were more stable and powerful, but also more expensive. Narrower gauges were cheaper, but they carried less weight. In England, this became a serious issue. Different companies used different gauges, forcing cargo to be unloaded and reloaded where lines met. Eventually, the government stepped in and established a standard gauge, 4 feet 8.5 inches. Interestingly, this measurement is thought to be very close to the axle width of wagons used in Roman times, suggesting that the standard was shaped by the human body itself. The situation in the United States was not much different. In the North, standard gauge was commonly used, while the South preferred a wider 5-foot gauge better suited for carrying cotton. At first, this wasn't a major problem because trade between North and South was limited. But after the Civil War, things changed. Trade increased, rail networks began to interconnect, and the gauge difference became a serious obstacle. At first, cargo had to be unloaded and reloaded. Later, smarter solutions were developed, but they were still costly and time-consuming. By the mid-1880s, some major rail lines had already converted to standard gauge, and the remaining southern railroads were eventually forced to follow. In 1886, a meeting was held in Atlanta, where southern railroads agreed to change their gauge. Interestingly, instead of choosing the future standard of 4 feet 8.5 inches, they opted for the slightly wider 4 feet 9 inches used by the Pennsylvania Railroad. Still, the decision was made, and the massive operation began. Preparations lasted for months. Rails were marked, spikes loosened, and railcar axles adjusted in advance. Some locomotives were even designed so their wheels could be reversed. When the day arrived at 3:30 a.m. on May 31st, thousands of workers began working simultaneously. Rails were shifted, spikes hammered in, and trains tested. Backup crews were sent out on trains to assist wherever needed. The result: In just 36 hours, nearly the entire Southern Railroad network, along with its locomotives and rail cars, had been converted to the new gauge. The process was so quiet and orderly that even engineering journals of the time noted that the public barely realized it had happened. The secret behind this success was simple: perfect planning. Trial runs had been done in advance, crews were trained, and every detail was carefully thought through. And the cost was surprisingly low, about $100 per mile. Even by today's standards, that's a very reasonable figure. This change took place right in the middle of America's economic transformation. Railroads played a key role in the shift from an agriculture-based society to an industrial one. What's interesting, though, is that despite all the gains in efficiency, shipping costs didn't go down. That's because railroad companies chose cooperation over competition and kept the profits for themselves. Ironically, the same cooperation that made this massive operation possible also limited its impact on society. And that's why this story remains a forgotten, but well worth remembering piece of history.